Okay. Okay, Shalom Aleichem. I'm going to discuss tonight the halachas of Purim this year, how to celebrate Purim on Friday. There are many halachic differences because Purim is on Friday. And so I'm not going to discuss all the laws of Purim, just the halachas which are connected to the fact that Purim is on Friday, and specifically about the meal of Purim and how the meal of Purim should work this year. But I do just want to mention one thing, and that is regarding Shalach Manas. The Rebbe said that it's worthwhile to always remind people about how, although people give from their families to other families a Shalach Manas, but the mitzvah is for a man to give a man, a woman to give a woman. That's a mitzvah Shalach Manas. So children should not fulfill their obligation just because their parents gave and their family gave. But every child who has reached the age of chinuch, reached the age of education, or even if it's a suffix, even if it's a question whether or not they're already at the age of education, they should already give Shalach Manas because it's such an important thing in their education, and they should give themselves, a boy to a boy and a girl to a girl. Okay. What time should the meal of Purim be this year? We have to have a meal on Friday night because it's Shabbos. And not only do we have to eat a meal on Friday night, we're supposed to eat that meal with a good appetite. And if we're going to eat a meal late in the day, so we're not going to be able to eat the meal of Purim with a good the meal of Shabbos with a good appetite. And therefore, although the halacha is in general, the Ramah says in general on a regular Purim, you daven mincha early, and this is also what it says in Chabad Sefer HaMenhagim, the book of our customs. It says that we daven mincha early on a regular Purim, and we eat the meal of Purim by day. The custom, the Ramah says, halacha this year, says the Ramah, is that the meal of Purim should be eaten in the morning. In order to be able to eat the meal of Shabbos with a good appetite, so the Ramah says you should eat the meal of Purim in the morning. Now, the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this stringency, although Rabbi Brun and other Chabad poskim say that this is true not only in a it's better to eat the Purim Suda earlier on, like the Ramah says. However, there are others who say that it's good to eat the Purim Suda, as we do in a regular year, in the early afternoon. And that's because the Alter Rebbe does say regarding other meals, which are a mitzvah to eat, for example, a mitzvah to have a meal by a bris milah, mitzvah to have a meal by a circumcision, the Alter Rebbe says that if there's a circumcision on a Friday, you're allowed to eat the Seudah. You ought to start having the Seudah, start having the meal in the 10th hour of the day. 10th hour of the day means if sunrise is at 6 o'clock and sunset is at 6 o'clock, so the Shah Zmani, so the halachic hours would be a full 60 minutes. So the 10th hour of the day would be between 3 and 4 o'clock. So Alter Rebbe says that in general, when you have a bris milah on Friday, you're allowed to start the meal by the 10th hour of the day. By 3 to 4, you could by 3 o'clock, you should have started your meal already. So it seems that the logic would follow as well for Purim, that it would be better to have the meal of Purim before 3 o'clock. So if we were to follow that logic, so the meal of Purim would be between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. That's when you should start the meal. A regular Purim you start after midday, and since we want to preserve our appetite for Shabbos, so the latest should be before 3 o'clock. That's what it would seem, according to the way the Alter Rebbe presents it in Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't mention the stringency of the Ramah of having the Purim meal in the morning. Now, we don't have the Alter Rebbe's halachas on the laws of Purim. We just know some halachas of Purim from the way Alter Rebbe writes about many other halachas which are connected to Purim. So so there is a various ways of looking at it, whether or not the meal should be in the morning or it should be in the early afternoon, but certainly it should be done before 3 o'clock. Ordinarily, in a regular Purim, our minhag is we eat the meal of Purim by day, we continue with the meal of Purim at night. The Ramah says, the halacha is that most of the meal has to be done by day. Usually by holidays, like Shabbos, for example, Shabbos continues till after Shkia, and after says Kachavim, after it's nightfall, until you say Havdalah, it's still considered Shabbos. Regarding Purim, though, after Shkia, after sundown, it's no longer Purim. And therefore, to do the mitzvah of the meal of Purim on a regular year, you have to eat most of the meal before it gets dark. Not only should you eat the bread, but whatever you're eating for the meal of Purim, your meat and your wine, you have to eat them before it gets dark on the day of Purim. That's what the Ramah says. But this year, not only you have to have most of the meal before sundown, you have to have the entire meal before sundown. Why have to have the entire meal before sundown? Because after Shkia, after sundown, it's Shabbos, you're not allowed to eat until you have Kiddush. And therefore, you have to finish the entire meal before sundown. That's what the halacha is. Now, there is a possibility that a person may want to start the meal at 3 o'clock, but sundown in Los Angeles is this year is around 5:45, and you didn't have a chance to eat the meal of Purim yet. Should you wash? Answer is yes, you should wash. Why should you wash? Although the Alter Rebbe says that it's better to eat the meal before 3 o'clock, still it's better to have the meal. It's better to have the meal of Purim later on than not to have it at all. Even though you won't be able to eat the meal of Shabbos with a good appetite if you eat the meal of Purim later on, but still it's a mitzvah to eat the meal of Purim, just like it's a mitzvah to eat the meal of Shabbos. And therefore it's better to eat the meal of Purim later on than to not eat at all the meal of Purim. And therefore, if you weren't able to eat the Sudas Purim by 3 o'clock, you should still wash and eat the meal of Purim later on until sundown. But what if it's already sundown? Then you have to stop. Now, there is a concept called Peres Mappa. What does Peres Mappa mean? Actually, before we get to Peres Mappa, by the Rebbe's Farbrengens, very often there was a yontif that preceded a Shabbos, and our custom is at the end of every yontif we wash and we have a Farbrengen. So if it was Friday, the Rebbe would have a Farbrengen on a Friday, leading into Shabbos. They would tell people to wash and have a maitzi before Shabbos started. And it was, even though it was after the 10th hour of the day, it was after 3 o'clock, but still, that's what our custom is. And it's possible that the reason why this is okay is because at those meals, you wouldn't really eat a full meal. You just have a motzi and say l'chaim until sundown, just to do this custom, having this farbrengen at the conclusion of the yontif. So that's why it's not an issue with Shabbos, because you're not eating a whole meal. However, with the whole meal of Purim, which is a full meal, that certainly has to be done earlier. It can't be done close to sundown. But again, if you didn't have a chance to do it before, then you should wash until sundown. Sunday you have to stop and you have to bench until you have your Kiddush. Now, there is a concept called Peres Mappa. What's Peres Mappa mean? Peres Mappa means that when Shabbos starts, you make Kiddush, and after you make Kiddush, you continue eating your meal. You just cover the chalos when you make Kiddush. You uncover the chalos after you make Kiddush, and you continue your meal. Now it's a Shabbos meal. So you're allowed to continue eating because you made Kiddush. You make Kiddush in the middle of your meal. You start your meal on Friday, and then you make Kiddush, and you continue your meal on Shabbos. So the question is this a good idea to do this? Is it okay to do this? Are there halachic issues? Is it worthwhile? how do we look at this concept? What's our custom and what is allowed regarding Purim Mapa? So the Alter Rebbe says that off the bat there are a couple of halachic issues. If when someone makes kiddush in the middle of their meal, especially in Purim, where you're supposed to drink specifically wine, and people drink other beverages as well, but the mitzvah of Purim is specifically to drink wine. So if you made a bracha on the wine already before and you make kiddush, you certainly can make a bracha again agafen in the wine. In addition to not being able to say agafen in the wine, there's a question whether or not you could say hamaitzi. One way of looking at it is as you could say hamaitzi. Why could you say hamaitzi? Because when you made kiddush, at the moment you make kiddush, you're not allowed to continue eating because now it's a time of kiddush. And since now is a time of kiddush, you're not allowed to continue eating. So therefore, there's an interruption to your bracha, and therefore you should say another bracha because your first bracha has been interrupted by the kiddush. Just like when you say brachas hamazon, you finish eating and you say the after blessing, you certainly have to say another bracha before you eat more bread. So some people say kiddush is in the same scenario. If you daven ma'ariv in the middle of your meal, you're allowed to continue eating without another bracha because ma'ariv is not considered interruption. However, if you do brachas hamazon, if you say the after blessing, even though you know you're going to continue eating, you still say new bracha. The brachas hamazon, the after blessing, is considered interruption. So kiddush is in between. It's not like davening. It's not like benching. It's in between. And there's an argument whether or not the brachas hamazon, whether or not the benching is considered a total stop, an interruption to the meal. So there's an argument. Some say you should say a bracha v'ameitzi when you wash before sundown and you make kiddush at sundown and you want to continue eating. Some people say you should say the bracha v'ameitzi. Some people say you shouldn't. So what does the Alter Rebbe say to do? The Alter Rebbe says don't do it. Alter Rebbe says a Baal Nefesh, someone who's very strict with keeping the mitzvahs of Hashem, should not make kiddush after sundown. That's Alter Rebbe says. Now, at the Rebbe's Farbrengens, until the year Tafshin 1984, Tafshin Daled Mem, this was done. The Rebbe himself will never do this, but by the Rebbe's Farbrengens, this was done in public, and it seems like it was by the Rebbe's encouragement to allow people to continue eating and continue their Farbrengen, and there was a Kiddush made. So it seems that although there are those who have to be careful about this, so the Rebbe himself wouldn't do it, the Friedrich Rebbe wouldn't do it, the Rebbe Rashab once did make Kiddush and he regretted it. I think it was the last year of in this world. And there's a whole story. The Friedrich Rebbe, he tried to hide the wine, so his father shouldn't make the Kiddush, and someone else wanted him to. Anyways, but it's not the custom of a Rebbeim ever to do Purim Mapa. However, it seems like from the Rebbe's Farbrengens that we're not concerned with this halachic issue because as the Alter Rebbe says, it's only a problem for a Baal Nefesh. But there is another issue. Another issue is, according to Kabbalah, on Friday night, there's a whole order of how the meal is supposed to work. First, you're supposed to daven ma'ariv. Now, after you daven ma'ariv, you make kiddush. And every prayer accomplishes something in the sphere of Shalmaila, in divine revelations in heaven. There's a hierarchy of how things progress, and therefore you're supposed to do things in order. First is Kabbalah Shabbos, then there's ma'ariv, then there's kiddush. And not only according to Kabbalah, but even according to halacha, there's an order. Halacha is there's a vayichulu that we say in the nighttime of Shemona Esrei. There's vayichulu we say after Shemona Esrei, and then there's another vayichulu that we say in the kiddush. So there's an order, and therefore that order has to be followed, and that's another reason, perhaps, why our Rebbeim would not do the order of Purim Mapa. However, again, since the Rebbe did encourage this by the Farbrengens or allowed it, encouraged it either way, it seems that this is not an issue. However, there's another issue. In the Rebbe in 1984, he said this is not to be done because he said that when people did this, there were bilbulin, there were mistakes. In other words, people did not know the halachas of how to do this properly, and because of that, the Rebbe said that they shouldn't do it. To the extent that in 1988 in Tashma Ches, the Rebbe said this has been stopped to be done in Chabad. It's no longer the Chabad custom to do this at all. So we don't do this. Now, it's still important to know the halachas because first of all, it's Torah, and second of all, those who do not follow the Chabad minhag, how should they proceed if they want to do this? So let's discuss a little bit how this works. if you're not Chabad and you want to make Kiddush, what you have to consider halachically, um, besides the issue of saying Hamaitzi, besides the issue of the Kabbalistic order and the of Kiddush after Ma'ariv, there are other issues. Number one, if you're going to uh, make Kiddush after Shkia, so your family has to wait for you to hear Kiddush. So at what point should you make Kiddush? By the Rebbe's Farbrengens, when someone make Kiddush, when would they make the Kiddush? They would make the Kiddush specifically after Tzeis Kachavim, after half hour after sundown. That's when the Kiddush was made by the Rebbe's Farbrengens. On the surface, the reason why Kiddush was made so late could be because of several reasons. Perhaps one reason might be because in order to, the Alter Rebbe writes that even if you have, you're allowed to make Kiddush earlier on a regular Friday, you want to make Kiddush early, you can. However, the Alter Rebbe says there's an opinion which says you should try to have at least a ounce of, Yudah, can you hear me, Yudah? Okay. The Alter says you should at least have a kazayas, an ounce, about 28 grams, after it's nightfall already. You're allowed to start your meal before, but the Alter mentions an opinion which says to do the mitzvah of the Shabbos meal, you need to continue your Shabbos meal, according to one opinion, until it's already nightfall. You can start earlier, but you should continue into the night. And so perhaps that's the reason why the Rebbe told people to wait to do Peres Mappa, to wait to make Kiddush until it was already nighttime, in order that they should be able to do the mitzvah of eating the Shabbos meal, which they wouldn't be doing that mitzvah if they would, according to that opinion. It's also another possible reason is when the previous Rebbe in Tafshin Dalet said that when you say that after blessing, if you would start your meal on a Friday and on its Yontiv, let's say it's Simchas Torah, and you continue your meal into Shabbos Bereshis, so now you have Yalav Yavi to say, and you have Ritzei to say. So there are opinions which say that this is an issue. You can't do both because Yalav Yavi is for Friday, and Shabbos, and Ritzei is for Shabbos, so you can't say them both in the same benching. It's a contradiction in itself. But the previous Rebbe said we say both Ritzei, and we also say Yalav Yavi, and that's what was announced also by the Rebbe's Farbrengens, that if you start the meal on Friday, continue onto Shabbos, you should say both. So perhaps the reason why the Rebbe told people to wait to make Kiddush until nightfall was in order that they should be able to say Ritzei, because you can only say Ritzei if you eat. The Rebbe himself will not say Ritzei, because the Rebbe himself will not eat after sundown. But if you wanted to be able to say Ritzei in benching, you would have to eat an ounce of bread after it's already Shabbos. And perhaps that's a reason why they were told the people to wait to make Kiddush until Tzeis Kachavim. It could be, there are other reasons. It could be just like according to Kabbalah, there's a reason to daven Ma'ariv later. Our custom is to daven Ma'ariv specifically later. And that could be that for Kiddush as well. I don't know. But either way, those reasons, except for the Kabbalistic reason, shouldn't apply to the meal of Purim. Because regarding the meal of Purim, we're not worried about you eating more food on Shabbos to fill the mitzvah of eating your meal after nightfall, because after all, you're going to continue eating for many hours. It's just the meal of Purim, you're going to continue for many hours. So certainly we're not worried about you only eating before nightfall. So therefore, there shouldn't be an issue of making Kiddush earlier. And conversely, there's a bigger issue when you have a meal with your family of making Kiddush later. Because after sundown, no one's allowed to eat anymore. So you're going to be sitting there for half an hour until you make Kiddush, and everyone in your family was already in the middle of a meal, you're going to stop eating for 30 minutes till you make Kiddush. It's going to be a whole great effort to cause everyone to stop eating until you make Kiddush. And therefore, it would seem it's a lot better if you're going to do Peres Mappa to make Kiddush in the middle of your meal, to make Kiddush before sundown, not to wait to make Kiddush after nightfall. But there's another issue. The other issue is, even if you're going to make Kiddush at home, you are going to miss out on a Ma'ariv with a minyan. You're going to miss out on a Baruch Hu. So that's another issue. Now you might say, okay, I'll have a meeting in my house. I'll have a meeting in my house, and we'll all daven together. So I'll have Ma'ariv and Baruch Hu and Kiddush, but there are still more issues. Even if you do make Kiddush earlier on, you have to also take care of another issue. And that issue is that once you make Kiddush, your meal is now a Shabbos meal. It's no longer a Purim meal. So at what point are you going to make Kiddush? You have to make sure to make Kiddush after you've eaten whatever you're supposed to eat for a Purim meal. And then you have to eat whatever you're going to eat for a Shabbos meal after you make Kiddush. You have to have the full Purim meal and a full Shabbos meal. Once you make Kiddush, it's no longer the Purim meal, it's a Shabbos meal. And there's an argument about whether or not you can fulfill the mitzvah of a Purim meal once you make Kiddush already. And therefore it seems that you shouldn't make Kiddush an hour before sundown, although you're luckily allowed to Kiddush an hour before sundown, but that would cut your Purim meal short. You intend to have a full Purim meal. And you shouldn't make Kiddush a half hour after sundown, because you have to watch your family not to eat anything. It would seem that if you're going to do this, the best time to make Kiddush would be right before sundown, so that your family will be able to continue eating and without any interruption. That's what seems to be the best thing. But you're still not out of the woods. There's still other issues as well. Other issue is, at what point should you daven Ma'ariv? At what point should you daven Ma'ariv? We know that the Ramah is famous. The Ramah used to walk outside on night of Purim, night after Purim, and he would tell people to be careful to not forget to daven Ma'ariv, because people were so drunk after the meal of Purim, and they would forget to daven Ma'ariv. So the Ramah would go around and remind people daven Ma'ariv, which is also another issue. When on every year, at what point should daven Ma'ariv in a regular year? There is the issue is like this: once you daven Ma'ariv, it's now considered the next day. And if it's considered the next day, you cannot say Al Hanisim. Al Hanisim is something that you say for the meal of Purim. But you can't say Al Hanisim once you've already davened Ma'ariv for Shabbos, because now it's already the next day. So although you started your meal earlier, and we said before, the previous Rebbe said you could say Yal V'Yaveh and you could say Ritzei in the same benching, but it's not the case for Al Nisim. Once you daven Ma'ariv, it's no longer considered Purim regarding the saying Al Nisim, and your benching is going to not have Al Nisim. So therefore, it would seem the best thing to do is finish your meal and say the after blessing, and then daven Ma'ariv to allow you to say this special Al Nisim that will only say a few times a year. That's what it seems the best thing to do is. And that is what the Magen Avram says to do. Magen Avram says the best thing to do is to finish your meal and say Brech Samazin and say Al Nisim and then daven Ma'ariv, because if you daven Ma'ariv in the middle, you can't say Al Nisim anymore. However, the Pri Megadim disagrees. The Pri Megadim says, one second, if you're going to daven Ma'ariv later, after you finish your meal, you may never get to Ma'ariv. You're going to be so drunk. First of all, there's halachic issues about if you're allowed to daven Ma'ariv when you're drunk. There's a certain point we're not allowed to daven Ma'ariv. The halacha talks about being in front of a king and how when you daven to Hashem, how you have to be very serious. And so if a person is so drunk they can't speak in front of a king, they're not allowed to daven Ma'ariv. So therefore, the Pri Megadim said it would be much better to daven Ma'ariv earlier and not say Al Nisim. That would be a better advice. And Reb Chaim Noah says, especially this is true for other reasons as well, it's not to be concerned of Al Nisim, which has less of a weighty obligation to say Al Nisim there is to say Al V'Yaveh. And just like when on a regular, and therefore he says, Reb Chaim Noah says that it's better to daven Ma'ariv in the middle of your meal and not say Al Nisim. However, Rabbi Braun and many other Chabad poskim say that if you are going to Peres Mappa, which is not the Chabad minhag, but if you're not Chabad, that's what you're doing, so it's better to daven Ma'ariv after you finish benching, so that you could say Al Hanisim in your benching. So I want to point out one more point, that is that the Rebbe said that since this year Purim is on Friday, and Purim, Shabbos doesn't want to minimize this in the joy of Purim, and therefore the Shabbos after Purim, especially in general, it's the day after Purim is Shushan Purim, but especially this year we have a great opportunity and celebration to continue the Suda and the Simcha of Purim. The whole discussion till now is about the halachic, what you say and what you don't say. Regarding the joy of Purim, it has to be exactly the same way it is on Purim, should be continued also on Shabbos, especially because of all these halachic issues of finishing the meal, that should not finish the Simcha of Purim. Simcha of Purim continues, especially in the Shushan Purim. And the main thing is we should go Geula to Geula, should go before the Geula of Purim, to the Geula Mitzvah Shlema, to Mashiach Tzakenu, and continue with Mashiach in Yerushalayim to celebrate the Simcha of Purim, as it says that even after Mashiach comes, the Simcha of Purim will still be considered a significant Simcha. Since the Simcha of Purim is such a fantastic Simcha, all other Yomim Tovim, it says, they'll be considered insignificant compared to the Simcha of Mashiach. But the Simcha of Purim will still be considered a joyous day even after Mashiach comes, because it's an infinite Simcha ad lo yada. Any questions, Yehuda? All right. Thank you for joining. A gute Nacht and ein Freilichen Purim.